And I just want to let you know, I'm going to be on for the first hour and I have to jump off or something, and I might jump back, but probably not. But if there's anything to vote on, let's do it on the front end.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it's just life.
I understand. It's a busy time of year. Hi, Angie. We got both Angies, both Jessies. All right, so I want to remind folks while everybody's coming on in, we have 3 more speakers in our speaker series, including today. And then in late August, we're going to pivot our conversations over to testing dynamics and some of the downstream applications of product deployment. I'm just looking for quorum here. If folks on the subcommittee can let me know when we have that. Let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of 6. I think that's good, right?
I don't remember exactly what a quorum is.
4 of 6 is a quorum, for sure.
Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, we have the very good fortune to be joined by Dr. James Keim, and he's going to give us a talk in just a moment. Before we get started, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm watching people trickle in and doing attendance. Maybe I'll circle back to that. Right now I see David, Steph, Angie Carter. Are there any other subcommittee members here? Not yet. We'll come back to that. The second thing we need to do is minutes approval. And then I want to have a quick discussion about our OHA partnership and our potential ORLAP guests and additions. So did everybody get my minutes and have a chance to look those over? Are there any objections or additions, edits, adds to the minutes? Could we get a movement for the minutes approval?
I move to approve the minutes.
And I'll second. Ooh.
Or Steph, we can both second.
Second and a third. It sounds like our minutes are approved. Okay, great. So for today's agenda, what we have is I want to have a quick discussion on testing, and then we'll have about 30 minutes of presentation from James, followed by the remainder of time to discuss between the subcommittee and members of the full board, and finally public comment. So I want to encourage folks to submit their public comments in the chat to Nick Riley by, let's say, 12:30 at the latest. Just as a reminder, you'll get 2 to 3 minutes for your public comment. Your questions, if you have them, will be rhetorical. So it's a comment period, not a discussion. And again, that's by chat to Nick Riley. Okay.
Hey, Jesse, I see that Mason's here, so we have a super quorum.
Super quorum, thank you. Hello, welcome, Mason.
Hello, good morning.
All right. So as we pivot our conversation from fungal products and species diversity over to testing, I'm very excited to involve OHA experts from the Oregon Environmental Lab Accreditation Program, or ORLAP division. So by way of background, they and their staff work to accredit the labs that test the quality of water, air, cannabis in our state. And this includes inspections of the actual labs themselves to review their processes, and the ultimate goal is to ensure product safety for the consumers. So as such, they have really relevant insights to the inner workings of testing labs and can help guide our recommendations for successful program launch. Today, we're going to review the CVs of 2 ORLAP associates, Program Manager Travis Bartholomew and ORLAP Assessor Steve Jeter. So their CVs have been circulated to the subcommittee for review, and I encourage you to have a look at them now if you haven't yet. And I want to have a brief discussion on how best to include them in our work and have their expertise help guide our suggestions. So briefly, Travis Bartholomew has been the ORLAP program manager since 2020 and is certified by the EPA, the TNI, to assess labs that test drinking water, environmental, cannabis, and asbestos contaminants from aqueous, solid, air, and biological tissue matrices. He has extensive experience with GCMS, GCFID, and HPLC technologies to evaluate contaminants in this wide diversity of tissue types. His responsibilities include biennial inspections of labs where he reviews their processes. So he holds a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Texas at Austin and has over 10 years of experience analyzing environmental samples, both at the bench using microbiological techniques, so looking for things like live contaminants, and also as an organic chemist. Before his time with OHA, Travis worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality as a lab assessor and later as a quality manager for Texas Air Laboratory. So that's Travis. Were folks able to see the CVs that were sent out? Are you looking at those? Are you reviewing those? Okay. So I want to give a brief bio for Stephen, and then let's have a discussion. Steve Jeter is the ORLAP program lead for cannabis lab accreditation and has been at ORLAP since 2018, where he performs assessment of cannabis, drinking water, and environmental laboratories. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Lewis and Clark and has over 18 years of experience in analytical lab technique using GC, HPLC, GCMS, and GC high-res MS instrumentation in environmental labs to detect diverse classes of organic compounds. He also has a lot of experience working with really complex samples of drinking water, industrial waste, fish tissues, plant materials, and river sediments, and has insights from participating in cannabis lab accreditation and agency rulemaking regarding cannabis sampling and testing. Before his time with ORLAB, Steve worked in commercial environmental labs in Colorado and Oregon, as well as at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality State Lab. So given the relevant experiences and expertise, I would like to include Stephen and Travis in our discussions moving forward in the product subcommittee. And I think it's pretty essential that ORLAP participates in these discussions to better understand the products landscape and provide insights into testing lab protocol standardization for a safe and successful program launch. So I personally see the most straightforward path to be including them as subcommittee members, but I'd like to hear others' thoughts and discussion on the topic. And also if anybody has questions about Steve or Travis or questions for our OHA partners.
I would personally welcome the expertise and the knowledge. It would be very useful to have. It's not something, the technical part is not something that I think any of us carry. So that would be very appropriate.
I agree with Jesse and I agree with Angela, and I welcome their participation.
I think their participation would be great, but I'm wondering why they would need to be members of the subcommittee as opposed to maybe guest speakers or something like that, like our other guests.
Yeah, I considered that as well. And I think that one of the main reasons is I'd like them to participate in multiple conversations. And I think as guest speakers, it may be challenging to have those conversations fit into public meeting law and also be transparent. On the flip side, I think that it'd be important to make sure they can physically make all of these meetings. I know this is a challenging time to carve hours out of all of our schedules. And I guess I would like to hear from Angie or Jesse how adding numbers to our subcommittee will change the requirements for quorum. So for example,
one thing though, if they become subcommittee members, then that's when the public meeting rule becomes a problem. Whereas if they're not subcommittee members, you can speak to them, probably as much as you want off the record. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does anybody else have thoughts or additions in terms of adding them as subcommittee members or as speakers? I think we have consensus that it's important to include them to help guide our next steps here.
if there's a consensus, then there's no need for me to offer my opinion. So though I welcome them as voting members because they do have technical expertise beyond our own. And I think that their opinions should carry weight.
So I would probably recommend if they are to be members, they not be voting members. Though I'd still like to hear more about why they should be members. And I'm also wondering if perhaps there should be a separate committee that addresses issues like testing and tracking.
May I, Jesse, you asked a question of Jesse Sweet or of me from OHA's perspective. So, and I'm wondering if I can provide a little bit of just a little more information if that's helpful.
Yeah, please.
Whether or not, however you determine to move forward, that is all up to this group. I would say that a reminder that these wouldn't be obviously governor appointed advisory board members. They don't have a vote in the full advisory board. I would say that if you choose to make them non-voting members of the subcommittee, we might need to put some sort of vote forward, and we'll have to send this to the advisory board for full approval anyway. But I would say, according to bylaws, but I would say that you all might determine in that recommendation to the full advisory board to sort of clarify whether or not they're going to be added as subcommittee members to be voting or non-voting, just so it reflects in the bylaws when we update those later. The last thing I'll just say is if they are members of the public, they won't be able to interact with you if they're not included in the subcommittee. We currently have a number of subcommittee members who are non-governor appointed subcommittee members that have been added throughout various subcommittees for this advisory board. And so it's up to you on how you want to structure that. We can't add another subcommittee. We don't have the resources at OHA to support that. So we're trying to make the most of very limited resources and at the same time provide overlap conversations and opportunities for everyone to hear from each other. And since there will be, the lab is working on the accreditation process, I think you all probably will want to hear what they're thinking as well and have some influence on that and recommendations for them, as well as them hearing from you. So, you know, I think Travis and Steve have, they're not obviously here today, but they've committed to being available to all of you. And so I'll just leave it there, but hopefully that gives a little bit more information.
Can you clarify a little bit about, I'm just a little confused by what you said about how if they're members of the public, we can't communicate with them. Didn't quite follow that. Sorry, Angie.
So if they're members of the public, they can only comment during the public comment period of the subcommittee meeting.
So subcommittee members can't speak to members of the public?
So the way that Jessie as the chair decides to run her subcommittee meeting is fully up to her. I don't want to, you know, get involved in that process. I'm just saying that the way that the majority of the subcommittees are working is that they have a conversation with subcommittee members, and then there's an opportunity for public comment, which is separate and outside of that dialogue. So as members of the public, they would only be able to probably interact with public comment. Again, this is all for all of you. This is something that you'll all have to decide and move forward with.
I'm saying that if they were just guest speakers, then they would not be subject to that public meeting rule is what I was suggesting. That's because we have guest speakers now that many subcommittee members and chairs go to for advice and speak to off the record. At least I think they do. That's my kind of understanding. So that's what I was suggesting, not that they just be like generic members of the public and comment during public comment, that they come in and speak about testing, just like we're having experts do.
Yeah. You could invite them as guest speakers also. That's not a problem. I would say that as we shift to product testing, they probably would need, based on all of your recommendation, to be invited to a number of those meetings, you know, officially, and would want to make sure that we're reflecting the conversation in the agenda. So,
Angie, and Angela, I guess, the equity subcommittee has a number of members who are, I mean, did they get voted in as subcommittee members, or are they guest speakers? I mean,
The members of the equity subcommittee are members of that subcommittee that have a liaison relationship with other subcommittees. And so far, I think what we've done is allow other people from the other subcommittees to speak in other subcommittees. I'm sorry about the dog. To speak in other subcommittees as if they were a member of the full board, but they just don't have voting rights. That was my understanding, but I may be incorrect.
well, it seems it works well. There's a lot of people on the equity subcommittee, and they seem to be members. So it feels appropriate that we might want to invite these two folks to be members. Do the people on the subcommittee and the equity subcommittee, do they have a voting? Are they voters? Do they vote?
In the equity subcommittee, but not for the full board.
That would be.
Thank you, Steph. I was actually thinking the same thing. Seems to be working fine there. We're
So-
smaller.
Yeah,
Should be easier here.
that seems like an intermediate.
My only other comment, I guess, it seems like there's a lot of, sorry, there's a lot of birds in the background. There are a lot of people I feel like who are, I know I would be super psyched to have on our committee. And I'm not sure why these two are so formally presented, I guess, today, and why not others? And
Yeah, can we nominate others to join our subcommittee then? Are we opening it up to other potential members?
Well, I'm curious to hear Steph and Mason, what other expertise we're in need of that we, so one of my intentions in generating a list of external speakers in the first place was to identify areas where we have expertise gaps. And I think this one's fairly clear why these individuals are qualified to help guide our suggestions and things. But if there are other areas where we are lacking expertise or we feel like we don't have enough information to make informed suggestions, I'd be happy to hear those and consider it. And I think it's a valid question.
It just seems that their expertise is very narrow. Do they have any experience at all in psilocybin or psychedelics or product, psychedelics manufacturing or anything like that? Because, it seems strange to have them comment on and vote on every issue.
I hear you. And I think, here's how I see it. They have the most relevant expertise given their technical skill set, which is quite narrow, and then also experience in the cannabis lab testing lab accreditation process. And so I think that, and maybe Angie can inform this statement a little more, but they will be directly involved with the process once the psilocybin, Services Act pans out into action. So I think that it would be wise to involve them now. Whether they have direct experience with psilocybin or not, I'm not sure. We could ask them that. But I think one alternative is to make them subcommittee members so that we can have these discussions, but in maybe not voting. How does that strike people?
I think that'd be fine.
I think it's fine. Whatever, as my daughter would say.
Whatever. It sounds like a good consensus then. Are there any objections to that mechanism? If not, would someone make a movement?
Well, I would like to discuss, they still have to be approved by the board. So I would kind of want to reopen it at that time. I'm just not sure why they would be treated specially versus other guest speakers that we've had come in, but I'm not opposed to them being non-voting members if the full board approves that.
Yeah, we will need to reserve a slice of time in the full board meeting to update them on this suggestion or decision. Definitely agree with that. And I just wanted to revisit the statement that I made earlier that I'm very open to hearing suggestions for including other expertise in any format on our subcommittee. think we have a shared goal of making the best and most informed decisions that we can, and involving whoever's, you know, best suited to help us do that. So that can be ongoing, but
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. Thank you.
So I'll motion to approve the two people we're speaking about to become subcommittee non-voting members.
I second the motion.
thank you. All right. So Angie, is there other discussion points on that topic that we need to cover before we move on?
And not that I know of. And just as a reminder, the ORLAP folks are actually, they're part of the OHA Public Health Division. They are in a different center. And so I can't speak on behalf of, you know, of their program or their center, but, you know, I'm happy as, you know, a representative of OHA, if there are any questions, to bring that information back to all of you if needed.
Thank you. All right. So let's move on to our speaker today. Dr. Keim, if you could cue up your slides while I do your intro here, that'd be great. Let us know if you, Dr. Keim, are you with us? There you are. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dr. James Keim of Mimosa Therapeutics. He is also an advisor to the board of directors of the Alexander Shulgin Research Institute. Dr. Keim is the co-founder and CEO of Mimosa Therapeutics. He's also a psychedelic psychotherapist and Fulbright Specialist Grant awardee, as well as the co-author of the book, The Violence of Men. James received his Bachelor's of Science in Social and Behavioral Sciences from Johns Hopkins in 1985, followed by a master's in social work from the Catholic University of America. James has extensive experience developing and deploying psychedelics in therapeutic settings, particularly related to trauma treatment. And his current venture with the public benefit corporation Mimosa is focused on bioreactor creation of psilocybin products. So in contrast to growing mushrooms as a psilocybin source, the bioreactors are used to cultivate hyphae from which psilocybin can be isolated. So to remind you, fungi belong to their whole own entire kingdom. But if an analogy to plants were to be made, the mushroom is like a fruit, while the hyphae is like the tree. So they're growing the body of the organism in liquid in these bioreactors. We're really looking forward to hearing more about your experience with the bioreactor-based hyphal cultivation and related issues of psilocybin product efficiency, standardization, sterility, and safety. So thank you and welcome, James.
Thank you so very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I am indebted to the hard work that all of you are doing in this just incredibly important task. You know, I said something similar to a friend of mine who was writing a book. I told him it was really important and how proud I was he was doing it. And I gave him writer's block for 2 years by saying that. So I hope I'm not in any way cursing your work, but it really is an honor. And if I might share my screen now, I will set this up. Let's see, it's giving me a little technical problem now. I'm working from a new laptop. Let me try this again. Okay, well, it looks like I'm going to need to go back to the old laptop. So with apologies, allow me to do that. But while I'm setting this up, let me say that I've come to this in one sense as a business person. I'm the founder of Mimosa Therapeutics. And I've been involved with a number of startups over my life, including previously a different psilocybin startup. And I'll have some slides that describe that in a bit. But I'd like today to review sort of the technology involved in bioreactor work, talk about its advantages, and perhaps mention just a couple of disadvantages as well. So excuse me while I sign into my other computer. I'm now putting the request out to join. So Nick, I should be in the waiting room for your.
Yeah, Nick, let me know if I can do anything to help here with the, oh, there he comes.
I'm going to take just a quick moment now to open up the right file, and then I should be with you.
No problem. I think we've all probably given presentations where our slide deck failed and we had to sing and dance instead.
Indeed.
And beautiful, and here we are. I'm a licensed social worker in California. I'm the CEO of Mimosa Therapeutics, a public benefit corporation, a psychedelic psychotherapist, co-author of the book, The Violence of Men, and a trauma specialist. As Jesse mentioned, a Fulbright specialist with my service completed in Vietnam. I'm founder of the LinkedIn group, the Psilocybin Business Association, and an advisor to the Alexandra Shulgin Research Institute. I was previously CEO of Oakland Licensed Professional Therapeutics, which was active in Jamaica. I've been a supervisor at the Institute for the Advancement of Psychotherapy in San Francisco and a clinician at West Berkeley Family Practice. I doubt there are any potential conflicts there, but thought it wouldn't hurt to mention that. I have no history of employment with traditional pharmaceutical companies. Mimosa is somewhat unique in that we exist at that sort of beautiful intersection of bioreactors and psychedelics. We don't make GMO products. We focus on natural full spectrum offerings. And we operate a pilot production lab in the Netherlands. We specialize in growing the mycelium, the hyphae of magic mushrooms, And that is legal in the Netherlands, even though fruit bodies are not. Mimosa also has a research lab in Oakland, California, and we really look forward to participation in Oregon. Mimosa is funded by the following firms: Integrated Investment Partners. That's led by Stephen Apcon, who's the one of the executive producers on Fantastic Fungi. Vine LLP, the Synergia Labs, River Psych Incorporated, which is associated with the River Styx Foundation. Nata Partners Foundation, which is associated with David Bronner, and Transliminal LLC. So Mimosa is focused essentially on three product lines: therapeutics and sacraments made from fungi and botanicals, bioreactors for home, clinic, co-op, and pharmacy markets, and drug testing kits made by Miraculous Labs in Germany. That was founded by Felix Bly, who you have had the pleasure of already chatting with. And Felix also serves as the vice president and for analytics with Mimosa. So our team includes Amanda Fielding, myself, Bob Stanley, who's the Chief Sacrament Officer, the CSO. Bob was the founding chair of Decriminalize Nature Oakland, and he's the chief steward of the Sacred Garden community, of which I'm a member. Anthony Gandia, Felix Bly, Tyra Calloway, John Turner, James Fadiman, Alan Rockefeller, and even my son, Jonathan Keim. And Jonathan's a sort of newer soul in the space, but the rest of the people here are wonderful souls, are just tops in each of their lanes, and they're an honor to work with. I previously was CEO of OLP Therapeutics, Oakland Licensed Professional Therapeutics, which tried to grow mushrooms that were exact in potency in Jamaica. And we ran into some problems. These difficulties inform our conversation today. And so if I might, allow me to start here. So this is a little map of the bauxite mining areas in Jamaica. And bauxite is one of these minerals that is mined right at the surface. And so essentially there are these open red scars all over Jamaica where the mining companies have mined bauxite. When it gets hot and dry in the summer and the winds come along, the bauxite powder goes right into the air and essentially coats the region to various degrees. There's probably no part now of Jamaica doesn't have some degree of contamination from this mining. And it's unfortunately the regions where it's most often mined are the best areas for growing mushrooms. And so the coastal areas of Jamaica are actually kind of too hot for mushroom growing. The mountain areas are ideal, but these are where the mines are. It was just impossible to grow without this contamination. Also in Jamaica, there's a good quantity of other toxic metal accumulation, which is often, frankly, related to the history of agricultural pesticides. And Mandeville, which is one of the centers of mushroom production, is one of the most contaminated areas with, especially with high levels of arsenic, in addition to cadmium and other problematic substances. And unrelated to our location, but related to just the challenges of trying to grow mushrooms in a way that creates a standardized offering. There's tremendous variation in the potency, even within the same flush of mushroom fruit bodies. Cap down, cap up, even small changes in the nitrogen in the soil you're using, all these create variation in potency. And it's just a challenge to grow consistently. And then it's a challenge to create consistency of your offerings based on just the 8 to 10-fold variation, even within the same flush. So these were challenging lessons for me. My goal as a therapist was to be able to offer something that guides and clinicians really want, which is just to be able to have confidence that you're going to give your client the experience that they need, that you'll be able to do small variations in dose. And as an example of some of the dangers of variation in potency, all you have to do is go online to some of the popular mushroom sites. This is a quote I took from Mycotopia. This person wrote, essentially, there was a weak batch, and so this person upped the dose to 4, then 5, then 6 grams. And 6 grams was still weaker than what this person was used to at 3 to 4 grams. And then he did 6.7 grams from the same flush. And within 10 minutes, it was really clear that he had taken a lot more than he intended. In 30 minutes, he wanted to call and ask for help from a friend, but he couldn't because his finger, quote unquote, my fingers look so big, I couldn't hit the buttons cleanly. I felt like I was in one of the bouncy rooms rented for kid parties. And I have to say, I've been there also. I'd like to say that somehow I'm, despite 30 years of clinical experience, that I don't have those accidents, but I would occasionally have those accidents also. And so I wanted the new clinicians, the new guides that were going to be coming into the space in droves, not to have to go through that experience and not to have the level of sort of tasting experience the therapist would have. Fortunately in the Bay Area, my clinical group worked with a one cultivator so long that he went from being, a fellow in his 30s to actually retiring and passing his practice on. And we knew that those sorts of stable relationships, the sort of skills that we developed in testing ourselves, were not scalable. That what was needed in the way of guides and therapists was a many-fold increase. And our traditional methods, as problematic as they were not even scalable. And so that was my motivation in starting OLP. I wanted that mushroom fruit bodies to somehow be the source of a standardized psilocybin offering, and it just was not doable. So I would venture, at least in terms of my personal audiences with people and experiences, that inconsistent potency is one of the leading contributors to unpleasant and accidental experiences. And this is where bioreactors came in. Because as I'll describe, bioreactors offer this crazy level of control and consistency. They allow for the sort of consistency so that psychotherapists, guides, sitters can make meaningful, small, and predictable changes. And it results in a meaningful change in experience. And currently, if you're working with mushroom fruit bodies, small changes are not meaningful because frankly, they're overshadowed by the significant variation in potency in natural psilocybe. More important, I'd like for there to be research with natural offerings, with natural mushrooms, with natural mycelium, research that explores the beauty of the full range of alkaloids and other components of magic mushrooms and other entheogens. This is not done currently for a very good reason. And that reason is that it's just not workable to do research based on the weight of mushroom. For research to be replicable, for it to be published in a good quality journal, it needs to be based on working with known and replicable quantities of alkaloids. And this is why people frankly go to synthetics. But it is now possible to create that same experiential consistency with bioreactor offerings. And we're just incredibly pleased to be part of that step forward. So when you grow mycelium in bioreactors, and again, it is the mycelium, it's the hyphae. We are not growing mushroom fruit bodies in bioreactors. And a bioreactor, by the way, is any vessel that's specialized for growing cell lines. No, and bioreactors are thousands of years old because the oldest bioreactor is a beer vat. A beer vat is a basic bioreactor. And these days, we use ones that are a bit more complex. And all we need to do is grow the mycelium of the mushroom because these contain all the active alkaloids of the fruiting mushroom body. So alkaloids are made essentially in the roots, pumped into the fruiting body at the right time. And so our goal with mycelium is to essentially trick them into thinking they need to make a mushroom so that they maximize their amount of alkaloids that we're looking for. And then we just harvest it at that point. With bioreactors, we can determine not only the exact quantities of psilocybin, but also baocystin and other alkaloids. And to our surprise, the quantities and ratios of alkaloids are sensitive to teeny changes in nutrients and other variables. It's almost like a butterfly effect, that just a small change in potassium or nitrogen results in a different ratio of perhaps baocystin to psilocybin or other variation in alkaloids. And this is in a way an advantage because the other alkaloids are interesting, they need more study, and we want to be able to customize not only psilocybin, but these other alkaloids as well. And bioreactors give us the ability to do that. So again, a bioreactor is just simply a vessel for growing cell cultures. They're very sophisticated these days. This is how we grow many vaccines, for example. They carefully control stir rate, temperature, aeration, pH, dissolved oxygen. You carefully control nutrient levels and other critical variables, and you do this with a computer. And so you essentially, you create these computerized algorithms. You put water in one of these vessels. You might start by putting nutrient broth, or you might have the computer decide when that goes in. And you push a button, and 1 week later, you harvest. So give you a sense of the difference in these. When you're growing mushroom fruit bodies, it's 6 to 8 weeks. In a bioreactor, it's 7 days. Your growth medium in a bioreactor is water, minerals, and often just malt. And with your fruit bodies, it's dirt or hay or wood chips, etc. These are manure-loving species, and although that's not allowed under the rules that you're discussing, that is still a commonly used method by many people, just because it's so fantastically productive. When you grow mycelium in bioreactors, you end up with a post-harvest residual of just water with a lot of nutrients that actually makes a great fertilizer. It has no psilocybin or alkaloids in it. The alkaloids are in the little balls that get created. And in contrast, with your mushroom fruit bodies, you've got dirt and mycelium, and the mycelium in the dirt actually has psilocybin in it. So if you go on Arrowwood and other sites, you will find ways, methods for cleaning out that mycelium from dirt, and then using methanol or other solvents to get it out. But essentially, you have a very psychoactive residual when you grow with mushroom fruit bodies. When you grow in bioreactors, you get that stable, computer-controlled, consistent potency. With mushroom fruit bodies, it's variable and often highly variable. The contamination potential with bioreactors is very low. We filter our water. We use very simple minerals and malt. And we harvest and can then immediately just put it into a freeze dryer and have a very, very stable offering. In contrast, with mushroom fruit bodies, and I can take from experience, you begin to appreciate the evolutionary skills of mold, because the mold is continually evolving and working against you. And so it's just been a pleasure to be able to work with bioreactors. I think that it actually takes a lot more skill to grow mushroom fruit bodies in a safe and consistent ways than it does to work with bioreactors. The process is pretty straightforward. You inoculate a bioreactor at a 10% level. So we start often by inoculating flasks, and then a 1 liter flask will inoculate a 10-liter bioreactor. A 10-liter bioreactor will inoculate a 100-liter bioreactor. And then a 100-liter bioreactor can inoculate a 1,000-liter bioreactor, and so on. On the left is a 10-liter stainless steel fermenter. This will give you a harvest of 50 grams a week of dry material. That's 1% psilocybin. On the right is a 200 liter bioreactor, and that'll give you 1,000 grams a week of 1% psilocybin material. This is a 15,000 liter system that would supply 75,000 grams of dry natural fungal mycelium of 1% psilocybin every week. And this is what we don't want to see. Because we work to help set up other companies with bioreactor systems as well, I'm very familiar with what's happening in Canada. And it actually terrifies me, because the mushroom fruit body cultivation and the efforts around creating bioreactor farms have no relation to the need, to the desire of customers, to the market. People are creating cultivation potential to raise money. And in Canada, I speak also as a founder of the Psilocybin Business Association. Already there is wild overproduction on the books in the process of being created. And it's because of the ease of raising money there. And frankly, the unsophistication of the money, because there is funding that wildly outstrips any reasonable consumer demand. This is a real challenge to, I think, the health of customers, because what we want are, we want good quality cultivation. We don't want mold. We don't want inconsistent offerings. And these require long-term employment. They require stable labs or stable farms for cultivation. And this sort of system, 15,000 liter, threatens that. And just to give you an idea of how we offer or will be offering within a couple months our offerings in Europe and specifically in the Netherlands. This is a microdose kit with very dainty, cute little bottles, and a focus on these as offerings that improve health, that improve the quality of life of people. And they come with a diary so that people can keep track of their experiences. So the beauty of bioreactors is that they offer what is in a way a very, once you've put in the big initial investment, inexpensive way to create incredibly high quality offerings and sacraments. And these will do a lot to help further good quality research, good experience, and confidence. And I still think that there's also room for mushroom fruit bodies. There's just something nice about the fruit body, and frankly, there'll be those people who want that experience sometimes. I want that experience sometimes. It's just sometimes mushrooms are just more fun. I think there are many seats at the table. I think bioreactors are going to occupy one of those seats. But as with any other cultivation method, it has its potential for disadvantage. And one of those potentials is if people start putting these mega bioreactors in, that will crash the market. And so I hope that in Oregon, we can do a great job and avoid what I see as the coming catastrophe in Canada. And if I might also speak as a therapist, one of the things that so very much pleases me is the connection of the therapeutic, the sacrament, with the guide and with the therapist. The two are not separated, which is so very important. And I think it would be a disaster if some of the old school medical traditions come in and this becomes a process whereby these are people think that somehow a prescription can be written and someone can go and fill it at a pharmacy. And that can be that, because that's not how it works, as you know. And I won't speak at this time about those issues, and because that's not why you've brought me here. But let me just say again, thank you, and really appreciate the ability to share this information with you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, James. We appreciate you coming to talk with us. I want to open it up to the subcommittee for discussion. Does anybody have questions or comments for James?
I guess I'm curious about the price breakdown. How much do one of those bioreactors, not the huge one, but maybe the mid-sized or smaller one, cost? So, you know, what would be the startup cost for a new business owner to invest in these? And then what's the return like? What kind of financial needs does it have to run? And then how much, like, you're saying in the mid-sized, I think you were saying like 10 grams a week was potential of psilocybin. So just trying to get a sense of what it would take for a business owner to start.
So one of the goals of Mimosa is actually to create bioreactors that are much more affordable, that can fit in someone's kitchen, that can fit in a clinic, and eventually ones that can fit into the really important world health context of pharmacies. For most of the world, most of the population, the central connection to healthcare is not a doctor, it's a pharmacy. And I first learned that as a Fulbright specialist in Southeast Asia, you know, that most people went to their pharmacist. And in most of the world, pharmacists give what are antibiotics and other important healing therapeutics. So we feel that part of our long-term mission with psychedelics is to create a distributed, democratized approach that puts inexpensive bioreactors into pharmacies around the world. And that's one of our goals as a public benefit corporation. The existing equipment, if you want these really supreme, very predictable machines, they're expensive. It's like opening a high-level commercial kitchen, although it's less expensive to have a psilocybin lab than it is to open up a Krispy Kreme in California, I should say. So that 10-liter bioreactor, each liter will give you at least 5 grams of dry material.
that's at least 1% potency. And so the 10 liter will give you then 50 grams a week, and you can run that continuously. And that machine is probably about $25,000. The unit that we're working on for the home will be able to produce about a tenth of that, and we're thinking it's going to be about $1,000.
Thank you.
And eventually we'll see probably the price go down to, my guess would be about $200 for a home unit. And what's beautiful about these is that, in some places, a co-op is the right model. And co-ops can purchase these and offer and work these in the way that the cannabis community does shared cannabis kitchens. Here in Oakland, we have some of the leading cannabis kitchen co-ops, where groups, especially of traditionally marginalized groups of business people and cultivators, can come together and have first-rate equipment and access to the most modern technology. And Amber Center is one of the leaders in that in Oakland. And I foresee a similar model coming up with similar leaders, whereby people come together and create these co-ops, these collaborations around these bioreactors. So the 10 liter is, that unit's probably about 25,000. 100 liter, you can probably get for about 50,000 or so, although higher end ones might be 100 or 125,000. And 1,000 liter is probably about 250,000 for an average one that might be of use to us. Each liter of working volume creates about 5 grams of dry material that's at 1% psilocybin potency.
Hey, James, nice to see you, and thanks for coming today. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Nice to see you, Mason.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the product that you mentioned, the pearls that you'll be offering, and how you arrived at that particular formulation. If you can say anything about that, that might be quite interesting to the committee.
Yeah, in a way, the pearls preceded us, and that if you look at research done in the 50s and 60s, it's actually done with pearls, although the scientific name is pellets. And because of the agricultural context, pellets often refer to animal manure. We thought that might not be the best name for these. But if you look at research on potency in the 50s and the 60s, if you look at the research of Albert Leung, for example, who's a scientist who discovered and isolated and named baeocystin and norbaeocystin, he worked with these same pellets, these same pearls. And so we've just merely moved to what was a research tool into the consumer market.
Can you tell us anything about the composition of those, pearls, or how they might compare to other delivery?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the pearls are formed because there's an impeller inside the bioreactor, and the impeller moves the fluid around. And so it's almost like the way truffles can form. The mycelium just have this tendency under certain stress or under certain conditions to ball up. And the impeller swirls the liquid medium around, and these little balls form.
Interesting.
And they can be consumed as is, or, and as a matter of fact, the law requires that in the Netherlands. Because the law in the Netherlands prohibits any sort of processing. We're not even allowed to dry them. But in what we'll see happen in most places, frankly, is that these will be harvested, washed off, and then put right into a freeze dryer. And they then produce a very stable powder. They have sort of a sort of nutty, pleasant taste by themselves, and I think they're quite beautiful, frankly. But for the most part, we're going to see these freeze dried and powdered.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Is a sclerotia the same as a truffle? Like, is it just a large mass of ultimately the pearls that are older?
So, so for fun, we call these wet truffles sometimes, but they're not really that. That's an unfair and inaccurate comparison, because the pearls that form are uniform if you grow them frankly in the right way. And truffles, the sclerotia, are of different sizes. The flavor is not necessarily always pleasant, and although they have also much better and much more consistent potency than mushroom fruit bodies do, they're not as consistent as these truffles, as these pearls are.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, stuffed truffles is a term that gets used to describe a lot of different fungal structures. So when we think of things like black truffles, the very tasty and rich in volatile compounds that are delectables in France and places like that, those are actually reproductive tissues. So in the same way that a mushroom is a reproductive structure that's producing spores and things, technically a truffle mycologically is a reproductive structure that has, sexual reproductive propagules, spores inside of it. Truffle is also a term that's been used to describe sclerotia, which is a mass of hyphae, so asexual tissue, but in a ball-shaped, fungal unit. So visually they're similar, but biologically they're different. And truffles have also been used to describe, of course, like chocolates and things. So it gets confusing when we use the same name for different structures, but what we're talking about here is creating, if I understood you, James, masses of hyphae, which are like the body of the organism, an asexual tissue that's conglomerated into small pearls or ball-shaped objects that are similar to the asexual truffles, but just a distinction to offer there.
Thank you, Jesse.
And are you looking to market not just microdosing, psilocybin for microdosing, but also larger, would you take more quantity, I assume, of the...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. In a way, it's almost more important for the macrodose to be exact in potency. The microdose, because it's subperceptual, you probably won't notice much variation when it's off. And it becomes a greater concern because we see a tendency for mushrooms perhaps to be following in the path of cannabis, and that there's a bit of a race to increase their potency. And we're seeing stronger and stronger mushrooms. And I think that that's going to continue, and that I don't think that serves us well. It increases the potential for unexpected experiences, and probably more among the less experienced, but still, it's a challenge. And I think that consistency in the macrodose is really a safety challenge for all of us, and a wonderful opportunity. It's also an interesting opportunity in the sense that as we come to understand more of the contribution of the other alkaloids to the experience, we can customize that for therapy purposes. So, for example, trauma are sometimes more auditory, and some other trauma are more visual. Probably trauma that are encoded in the presence of a lot of adrenaline tend to be more visual. Trauma encoded in the presence of more histamine often are more auditory. And by report, different mushrooms give more visual. Some will give more visuals. Some will be more visually stimulating, and some more auditory. And as therapists, that offers really interesting clinical opportunities. So perhaps, for example, we'll want to, if people have a lot of unprocessed trauma related to visual memories, perhaps we'll want to avoid visual stimuli or very visual mushrooms. And perhaps when they're further along the therapy, it might flip, and that actually might be where we want to eventually end up. There's some mushrooms that have much more of a warm hug that are a little bit more MDMA-like, and those might be the ones we want to start with, and then move towards ones that facilitate either visual or auditory processing. And we haven't yet broken the code of how the different ratios and quantities of alkaloids give us these experiences without even stepping into the challenges of MAOIs. And so there's so much really beautiful work to be done, so much that needs to be understood. And it's part of also why I love bioreactors. It's so much easier to tinker with these ratios, to determine these alkaloid levels in a bioreactor than it is with a mushroom fruit body.
Well, it's exciting indeed, and thank you for your passion and commitment and sharing all that information with us. I do have a question about the how stable the end product is, and if I understand, they're freeze dried, and is the product kept in that, or is it's not affected by heat and light and all these other components that we hear impact the potency of psilocybin?
Once you freeze dry it, you've essentially removed mold as your enemy. But then if you leave it out in the light, it degrades. If you don't store it degrades in the same way that mushroom fruit bodies degrade. So it still requires conscientious and storage.
Thank you.
Yeah. If I might speak also a bit to kind of Mimosa's approach to patenting. We're surprised that a couple of publications of Felix Bly related to genetically modified organisms that produce psilocybin were put into patent applications. And because the understanding I had, as someone who's not well versed in law, was that if you published, no one else can really patent that. It's like somehow puts it into the patent-free zone. And I've learned since then that it's not that simple. And there are some really interesting conversations going on related to this. And Mason, I've sat in on some where you've made some very interesting points. We are Mimosa, as part of our public benefit work, we are including, I guess it's called putting a letter into the file, noting Felix Bly's and the work of others that's already been published when companies are attempting to patent that work. And it's not because we're competitors, because we don't do genetically modified organisms. We just object to the idea of companies trying to patent work that scientists have published as a gift. We do believe in patents to protect what's actually a novel contribution of some sort. And in some of our formulations, we are going to be doing some patents, and we're including patent pledges. And our patent pledges allow for use by individuals, by businesses that earn less than $500,000 a year, by various indigenous groups, and broadly in developing nations.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, James. I really appreciate that, because this is something that hasn't really come up on the board before, and something I've been intending to raise at some point is a discussion of the role that patents might play in Oregon, and this idea of a patent pledge, and if that's something that we as a subcommittee and a board might want to explore, encouraging in some way companies that wish to participate in the Oregon market to take a pledge like that. So I thanks for bringing that up. It's a great topic for discussion.
It would be a real gift if Oregon could come up with a model patent pledge. You know, we have the finances to sort of work on this project ourselves and come up with a version 1.0. But there really is a need for a version 2.0, and for something that is just a common form that people can use to protect their property from competition from larger businesses without making it difficult for smaller businesses and for people who have historical rights to these therapeutics, and to individuals who just wish to, you know, become better people and improve their health.
We'll definitely circle back to that. I think we'll take that up either here or perhaps on the licensing subcommittee. Sorry, Jesse, did you want to jump in?
No, I'm enjoying the conversation. Appreciate the comments and questions from all. I wonder if you could speak, James, to the potential occupational hazards of employees working at facilities where bioreactors are being used. Anything that you're, worried about, or special measures that you take to ensure safety of your group while they're at work?
Yes. So the big bioreactors really require highly skilled workers. For example, just the lids on those are like the lids of tanks. If they fall on you, you're in terrible trouble. And high quality bioreactors actually automate the lids and other processes so that they're actually amazingly safe. The challenge comes when people try to repurpose bioreactors that have been previously used, especially for other purposes. And that would be one of the concerns that I would have in terms of their safety. So bioreactors are modern when you pay $25,000 for a bioreactor, you're going to get a food grade bioreactor. But it's possible for people to repurpose non-food grade bioreactors, and even ones that have been used for odd sorts of chemical purposes, which are questionable in terms of repurposed machinery. And so there are safety concerns when it comes to repurposing bioreactors, but new bioreactors are frankly quite safe and make GMP cultivation easy.
Awesome, thank you. I'm also curious if your group has any experience with extracting psilocybin from ground hyphae or whole hyphae. We've talked a lot about the consumption of pearls straight away, dried pearls, or powdered pulverized mycelia containing those psilocybin and other active alkaloids. And I just wonder, are you familiar with the extraction and purification process of psilocybin?
So Felix Bly is our extraction specialist. And it's a great question because, you know, there's a lot of wonderful mystery around the other alkaloids. And so for example, maybe baeocystin has some wonderful health and healing and spiritual properties. We do know that it's frankly very easy to do extraction once you have freeze-dried pearls and powdered them. And it's frankly very easy with fruit bodies as well. In terms of actual process and so on, I'd have to put Felix back into the Zoom to answer those questions, because it's definitely outside of my wheelhouse.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we've been having some discussions around solvents used in extraction and the potential for them to end up in food products or concentrated products. But we enjoyed talking with Felix, and he talked a lot about extractions as well. So we could refer back to those notes.
And you know, one of the great delivery systems that's coming up are topicals as well. And that's something that Mimosa is working with. And you know, our Tyra Calloway is our specialist and has worked in the makeup industry and is really familiar with the laws and with the issues of solvents. And when someone like Tyra is your formulation chemist, you know, we're safe and everything's good. But there is the need to apply to topicals the same standards that are applied to makeup, and that we want to be sure that we have removed any solvents.
Certainly. I would like to offer a reminder that if you have public comments, please submit them to Nick Riley in the chat within the next few minutes here. We're going to transition over after a few more questions and discussion points with the subcommittee and the board. Does anyone else have questions or comments for our speaker today? I'm curious, James, if you could elaborate on what species are amenable to bioreactor cultivation.
So here's where it's really fun. when we're talking about the cultivation, the commercial cultivation of mushroom fruit, all of you would be familiar with some of the big names. Golden Teacher, B+, and others. But in the mushroom world, these are in some ways the equivalent of the red delicious apple. These are commercial varieties that are available because frankly, they're easy to grow. They transport well, they are predictable. But the more than 200 varieties and species of magic mushrooms offer amazing potential and so many different opportunities for different therapy experiences and different health experiences. And bioreactors allow us to grow those with much greater ease because again, we're just growing the mycelium. And we don't have to coax the mycelium to produce a mushroom, which is the challenge with so many varieties of magic mushrooms. So part of what's exciting about this is that bioreactors allow us to appreciate a much greater diversity of what nature has to offer and not the limited and small subset that are commercially viable.
That's really exciting. I think that's so cool.
It's amazing. And our chief mycologist is Alan Rockefeller, and he's bringing into our European labs this amazing variety for us to experiment with, and they're interesting, and frankly, it gives us an excuse to go out into the field and forage in exotic places, and it just makes my job and all of our work all the more exciting.
That does sound exciting. Are there any more questions or comments from the subcommittee or from members of the full board before we transition over to public comment? If not, our first public comment comes from Michelle Wiseman. Michelle, please.
Hey, Jesse, thank you. Hopefully you all can hear me. My audio's been cutting out, so I apologize if you already mentioned some of these things. The idea about a bioreactor is pretty exciting, and at that price point of $200 is pretty incredible. I was kind of doing some basic math in my head. I do a lot of electronics work on the side, and you can even probably make your own for about that cost with like thermal electronic regulators and magnetic coils, etc. But the not so trivial costs here that you've been talking about are lyophilizers, which are used to freeze dry the mushrooms. And so I just wanted to mention that there is like kind of an at-home lyophilizer kit you can buy through Harvest Right for about $4,000, but a laboratory grade lyophilizer is going to be about $20,000. So, well, yeah, 10 to 100,000. So I just wanted to mention that a cost to take into account. And then post lyophilization or freeze drying, you're going to need to protect the powdered mycelium from not only light but also oxygen. So I would imagine powdered mycelium it's hygroscopic. So if you just leave it out at ambient humidity, it's probably going to take up water. And then, yeah, you mentioned the mold thing. So that's, on par with attracting molds, also just the degradation of psilocybin. So just some things to take into account, but very interesting. I haven't heard much about bioreactors. I think there's definitely some potential there. So thank you. Thank you for your time, James.
Thank you for your comments, Michelle. Does anyone else have any public comments? I see that Nick has put out a call for public comments. And hearing no other interests, I think we can end there. So please join me in thanking James. We very much enjoyed having you. Appreciate you spending your time with us today. And yeah, thanks for coming out.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor. And this is just such an exciting moment in history. And so I get to be like a fan right now. And this is such a sweet moment for me. Thank you.
All right, folks, we'll see you in 2 weeks then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.